start. My name is Luke Murphy. I'm head of the Environmental Justice Commission at the Institute for Public Policy Research. And for those that don't know us, we have offices in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in London, and in Manchester, and we're the UK's leading progressive think tank. And I wanted to begin by welcoming our audience here in Glasgow, and also just taking in, I know not everyone online can see it, but taking in the marvel that is this building. And we're really grateful to Glasgow City Council for hosting us today. I also wanted to thank our supporters, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Local Trust and Agulhas, who have helped us put on this event. And we are going to have two really interesting discussions on this, what is supposed to be the last official day of COP, although I think we know that the negotiations are going to be going on long into Saturday and potentially Sunday as well. But while that is going on in the blue zone, I'm hoping that we're going to have some fantastic discussions here today over the next two sessions. Over the past 2 years, the Institute of Public Policy Research has run the Cross-Party Environmental Justice Commission. And at the heart of that commission, its central mission allies really with the central mission of so many people, of what so many people have been arguing for around the world at COP26. And that is to ally not just to achieve environmental justice, where we reduce emissions and restore nature, but we also do so by advancing economic and social justice at the same time. Not only because it's the right thing to do, not only because if we're taking this opportunity to transform our economy and our society, we should be seeking to improve inequality across the world as well, but also because unless we do that, our commissioners certainly argued that we won't take people with us. We need to make sure we're also tackling the other structural injustices that people face, as well as tackling the environmental crisis. And at the heart of that agenda for us is securing a just transition and also ensuring that people and communities are at the heart of action on climate and nature. And the Commission itself put people at the heart of its work by hosting citizens' juries across the UK, in Aberdeenshire, in South Wales Valleys, in Thurrock, and in Tees Valley and County Durham, looking at how we can ensure a fair and just transition in areas in the UK that are going to be affected in particular by the transition, but that could also potentially benefit from the many opportunities that there are. But obviously the just transition and ensuring and tackling inequalities is about so much more than just the UK, albeit the Commission was focused primarily on the UK, which is why we're so pleased today to be bringing together organisations and speakers from around the world to look at and understand what a just transition looks like in different contexts, understand some of those examples of what good and bad transitions have been. And also, I'm really pleased that we've got a number of community groups from around the world hear about the benefits that community action on climate and nature can bring, the benefits it can bring to local communities, and also in building public support for the transition as well. You're not going to hear much more from me. I'm going to hand over to Becca, who is the Deputy Head of the Commission, who's going to be chairing the first session. Then we'll have a 15-minute break, and then we will move into the second session. We're going to hear from all of our speakers in both sessions briefly. Most of our speakers are joining us online, and that is naturally because they are joining us from around the world, but we'll be taking questions from within the room and also online through Zoom. But thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the event, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to be having over the next couple of hours. Thank you, Becca.
Thank you very much, Luke. It's a big and echoey room. I hope everybody can hear okay. So welcome to our first of our two events. And this session will be very much focusing on just transitions from around the world, exploring really tangible lessons and insights from these different international examples of just transitions across different sectors, industries, and looking at kind of real kind of case studies that people will bring from their own experiences. As Luke said, we'll hear from all of our panelists, and there'll be an opportunity for questions. Really pleased to see so many of you here and so many online as well. And then we'll be coming to our panel for their closing remarks. I'm really pleased to introduce our fantastic panel for this first event this morning. In the order in which they'll speak, firstly, I'm conscious on the screen behind me, and I'm not going to, I won't be turning around all the time to be sort of, but I'm pleased to see that you're all there. We have Kwabena Alamang of the University of Ghana. Kwabena is the professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Agribusiness. Really pleased to have you here today. And then next up, we'll have Hanna. Hanna Brauers is a research associate at the Europa Universitat Flensburg at the Center for Sustainable Energy Systems. And then after that, we'll have Tari Lestari of the Dala Institute for Environment and Society in Indonesia. She's a research associate at the Institute and is also coordinating South to South Just Transitions project in Indonesia, which is a collaborative research project across 9 countries in the global South. Then next up, we'll have Nithi Nesadurai, Director and Regional Coordinator of the Climate Action Network of Southeast Asia. Nithi also just said it was his 15th COP, so a seasoned expert at these events. And then last but not least, we'll have Philipp, who is Policy Officer for Environment, Climate and Sustainability at the German Trade Union Confederation. He mainly focuses on climate-related changes in the economy and just transition. And I'm really pleased to welcome all of our speakers, and particularly today on this last day, or last for many of us, last day of COP. I know for some people it'll be reaching beyond today, but I think it's a really nice moment to take stock of these learning opportunities and end on some notes of positivity and optimism and hope. And with that, I'm really pleased to welcome our first speaker. So Kwabena, over to you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Kwabina Alamang. I'm a professor at the University of Ghana. One of my major areas of research is in resource and environmental economics, and we've been covering just transition strategy. In Ghana, the Ministry of Labor and Employment Relations has come out with a green job strategy document, which envisage Ghana to move towards a low carbon economy. And in that document, the government has clearly spelled out various just transition strategies that it wants to undertake to move Ghana to a lower carbon economy. Again, we have the Ghana Trade Union Congress. They also come out with a policy document, and in that policy document is clearly this just transition strategies. However, the apex planning body, the state planning body, National Development Planning Commission, they have not included specific just transition strategy terms, but in our meetings with them, I think they are doing certain things which can be classified as just transition strategies. Overall, we have undertaken environmentally extended input-output analysis of the Ghanaian economy, and we have identified 5 areas where climate change will be the impacting agencies or industries. These are agriculture sector as a whole, then it's electricity generation, transport and storage, and non-metallic minerals production and rice milling. So these are the 5 main areas that we would like to concentrate. One of our suggestions, which we are pushing to the government, is that given that there's increasing income inequality in Ghana, we have to start looking at the transport and storage industry, which is the 3rd major source of carbon dioxide emissions, greenhouse gas emissions and introduce a form of congestion tax on private vehicles and exempt public transport and also exempt taxis, so that will shift tax base away from labor into the mainly towards the richer segment of society. So we are talking of a congestion tax on private vehicles. To conclude, just transition strategies are in place in Ghana through the government Ministry of Labor and Employment Relations. However, their spread into the whole economy, I think, is a little bit slow, and we are also in the process of pushing that. There are two fundamental issues we have to look at. It's not just about jobs, because only 13% of the economy is in the formal sector. It's really two major areas: livelihood opportunities and then jobs. In the jobs area, we have to be concerned that we don't lose too many jobs in the process of transition to low carbon economy. But the key area in Ghana, I think, livelihood opportunities should actually be enhanced with greening the economy. So on that note, I would like to thank you for the invitation and conclude. So I've concluded. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that and for opening this event for us. I'm really pleased now to pass on to Hanna. Hanna, over to you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. The just transition example I want to contribute today is the hard coal mining phase out in Germany. Germany currently still uses coal, but has committed itself to fully phase out coal use at the latest by 2038. And that date might be brought forward to 2030 by the new government that is still negotiating a coalition agreement at the moment. In any case, hard coal mining already ended in 2018, and that posed a large just transition challenge, as in 1958, around 600,000 people were still employed by the industry and regions depended on it at the time. The hard coal mining areas in Germany experienced an around 60-year-long and mostly economically driven decline of their coal industries. Implemented policies managed to protect at the time affected workers, and actually no one got unemployed without special benefits. The German case shows that coordinated structural policy programs can really improve the situation for workers and entire regions formerly dependent on a fossil fuel industry. The strategic planning of just transition measures in structural policy programs can maintain the attractiveness of such areas and improve well-being of their citizens. However, those historic approaches taken in Germany were not holistic or forward-looking enough for the upcoming global challenge of phasing out all fossil fuels quickly enough to fulfill global climate targets. Nevertheless, it is still useful to look at what worked well to incorporate some of the elements used in Germany in other upcoming transitions. So central elements of the German just transition management approach were the following. One important element was a multi-level governance and planning approach, where different levels, so the national, federal, state, regional, and municipal governments work together on managing the transition. And then the just transition policies can be grouped into 4 different categories. So 1 was economic diversification, 2, workforce support, 3, social well-being, and 4, the environment. And we derived 5 lessons from those past 6 decades of German policies to support workers and regions affected by coal decline. The first lesson was that historical policies tended to focus in the beginning on protecting the coal industry and to slow down the decline. But the more anticipative structural policy approach later on really promoted job creation and new industries in coal regions and was much more successful. The second lesson is that large-scale government investments and industrial policies were central elements of the approach to support coal regions, and an active role of the public sector in regional economic policy was important to attract new businesses, to promote economic growth and job creation. The third lesson is that policies were particularly successful when they were tailored to the local realities and needs. So including active participation of local stakeholders in the design, but also the implementation of policies, creates more effective interventions, as well as a higher social acceptance. Then the fourth lesson Policies prioritize the quality of life of local communities through an integrative approach of economic, educational, cultural, and environmental interventions, and not only hard factor policies such as infrastructure investments or financial support. The latter two are obviously very important. However, the importance of so-called soft location factors, improving the attractiveness of living in an area, is often underestimated. So the last and fifth lesson: a strong social security system was a critical component in Germany's effort to assist workers and communities. So in contexts where no such social protection exists, it would be very important to include these elements in just transition policies as well. Germany also experienced a second decline in parallel to the hard coal mining phase out, and the much quicker reduction of lignite mining in the 1990s in Germany has shown that a lack of strategic planning and a lacking focus on creating new business and employment opportunities can do much harm to regions. So concerns in particular about increasing unemployment, energy prices, poverty levels, as well as the loss of international competitiveness and immigration have and are still stopping more ambitious transitions. Additionally, in particular, fossil fuel companies have been very successful in preventing measures that would hurt their businesses. So it is all the more important to acknowledge that avoiding the problem at hand by delaying phase-out decisions and economic diversification is only going to aggravate the problem. Therefore, proactive just transition programs and international cooperation on how to design policies and institutions, as well as financial support, are much needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hanna. And apologies to those in the room for some challenges with the screen, which I think hopefully we're now on top of. Thank you so much. So thank you, Hanna. And now Tari, over to you, Tari.
Thank you for having me here, and also the opportunity to share the Indonesian experience of just transition. Just a little bit of background of Indonesia. So Indonesia is the world's largest archipelago country with over 17,000 islands, and also the fourth most populous country in the world with 270 million inhabitants. Up to 75% of the population is of working age. So job creation is the focus of labor market management that unfortunately is not yet linked to the strategies to transition to lower carbon economy. Our economy and labor market are still heavily dependent on natural resources, and up to 60% of the Indonesian workforce work in the informal sector with limited safety nets and social protection. Indonesia is also the world's top coal exporter and the 10th biggest carbon emitter, with two sectors, forestry and energy, accounting for more than 80% of the country's total emissions. On the just transition itself, Indonesia has made some international commitments, such as becoming one of the signatory countries to the Silesia Declaration, and recently this year also submitted the updated NDC and long-term strategy for low carbon and climate resilience that incorporated just transition explicitly. And last month, the National Development Planning Agency has also included just transition in the low carbon development initiative that aims at integrating the climate actions into countries' development agenda. All of those international commitments and policy documents are very good and important steps. However, there is still lots of work to be done, and especially in translating these policy and commitments into action. And based on my experience in engaging with stakeholders in Indonesia on just transition issue, overall, the term just transition itself is relatively new to most stakeholders, including the policymakers and some labor unions. And most people have never heard about just transition before, and those who have heard about it before have limited conceptual understanding. And this lack of awareness is not only limited to just transition, but also to the general issue of climate change, the need to transition and the need for everyone to take action. So ensuring a just transition in Indonesia will require a radical and transformational change in the mindset and the behavior of society. Another challenge in Indonesia is also the limited data availability. So understanding the numbers of potential jobs that could be lost and could be created due to policy intervention of climate change is very difficult. And however, for some stakeholders, the term just transition itself is just putting another new label for something that we've already done. So it's just the way, whether we can call one action just transition or not is something that kind of being debated in Indonesia. Despite the current debate on the concept, definition, and criteria, a just transition still needs to happen in Indonesia inevitably. And one of the prominent examples is the coal-producing regions. Recently, the government announced a national goal for net zero emissions by 2060. Also plan to stop commissioning new coal-fired power plants and phase out coal for electricity by 2056. And all of this planned, combined with the projected decrease in coal demand from exporting from countries, export destination countries, will have dire consequences in several districts in East and West Kalimantan and also South Sumatra, because coal is the economic backbone in these regions. Having said that, there is a real need and imminent need for the government to prepare strategy and policy to facilitate the process and implementation of just transition. And funding is also an important element. Recently, the Indonesian government has just introduced a carbon tax, which can potentially be used to finance the transition. And coordination among stakeholders is also key. Several ministries have actually had policies and programs that, if being put together, are actually the ingredients for a smooth and fair transition. But it can only happen if they communicate and coordinate effectively to reach the synergy. To sum up, in the Indonesian context, and I think it's also true for most developing countries, a transition that is just and inclusive needs to take into account not only the workers that are directly affected by the policy, but also all workers along the value chain and supporting services such as the hotel, restaurant, and transport around the industry. It has to consider the local community that mostly work in the informal economy. It has to benefit not only the big corporation, but also most importantly, the indigenous community, women, and other marginalized groups. And it should also help to reduce the poverty and inequality. Human is at the center of a just transition. Therefore, a social dialogue that put together the people who make the policy and the people who will be impacted by policy need to happen. So everyone's voice is heard, and it will make sure that no one is left behind. And thank you.
Thank you so much. And Nithi, our in-person guest, thank you. I'm really pleased to hand over to you now.
Thanks, Becca. It's a pleasure to be here in this beautiful hall. I'd just like to talk about the efforts of Climate Action Network Southeast Asia, our advocacy on raising the profile of just transition in Southeast Asia. I think it would be useful first to define what we mean by Southeast Asia. It's basically the 10 countries which come under the intergovernmental institution known as ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, from Myanmar in the west, all the way across the Philippines in the east, from Vietnam in the north, all the way down to Indonesia in the south, and all the countries in between. It's a very diverse region, one culturally, language-wise, and also within the 10 countries, we have a developed country, we have a very high income country, and we have 2 least developed countries and 6 in between. One thing nearly all of them have in common is the fact that they tend to be autocratic and without much institutionalized role for public participation and public consultation in decision making. So they have that in common. It's also a region especially vulnerable to climate risk. In the Climate Vulnerability Index, 4 countries in Southeast Asia were ranked amongst the top 10 vulnerable to climate risk. And this was a study over a period of 20 years. And the Asian Development Bank has always said that Southeast Asia is especially vulnerable to climate impacts, and if they are not addressed, it could take, the region could lose more than 10% of their gross domestic product in the future, more than 10%. So very clear link between climate, not addressing climate becomes an economic risk. One thing they all have in common, one thing the region has in common is that as one of the sort of fast-growing economic regions in the world, there's been a huge demand for energy, and 80% of that energy demand between 2000 and 2018 has been met by fossil fuels. So there's been a past trend, and the International Energy Agency's projections for the future show that by 2040, there'll still be a more than 35% reliance on the use of coal in energy, and that still will be a prominent role for gas and oil in the region. So we're still going to be very energy intensive and very fossil fuel intensive. So the question then becomes, how are Southeast Asian governments responding to just transition? So my response is, what response to just transition? There is none. The profile is extremely low, awareness is extremely low. And it was because of that civil society in Southeast Asia decided to promote the issue, in the sense that if our governments are not willing to talk about just transition or start thinking about just transition, we will bring it onto the agenda. We did it the first time was when we being civil society constituencies in Southeast Asia, were invited to present a statement at the meeting of the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change in 2020. This was an unprecedented invitation whereby the region's top climate negotiators were coming for a meeting. They invited civil society to sit in that meeting during the entire deliberations and then present a statement to them live. And we did. And of the 5 demands we made, one is for ASEAN to develop a just energy transition policy. So we presented that to our leading climate negotiators. Second, what happened was Friedrich Ebert Stiftung had this brilliant idea to convene the first inaugural Just Transition Forum in Asia in collaboration with Climate Action Network, Southeast Asia. And we held this on the 9th of September, a couple of months ago. It was a one-day event with more than 170 participants. And the great thing which came out, was very well received. So now we have institutionalized this event, and it'll be held every year from now on. So we're going to have a Just Transition Forum in Asia annually. And so the whole idea is to provide the space for discussing just transition and raising the profile with the state and non-state actors. And the third example I'd like to give, and this is something which is really, really exciting. It's a project funded by 2 German government agencies, IKI and BMU, which is called Innovation Regions for Just Energy Transition. It's a consortium comprising GIZ as the coordinator, the International Labour Organization, International Trade Unions Confederation, Climate Action Network, Wuppertal Institute, and International Institute for Sustainable Development. And the whole idea is to focus on Indonesia in 2 active coal mining regions in East Kalimantan and South Sumatra. So we did the scoping study from March to September this year in terms of planning for a 4-year project, which is going to kick off early next year. And it's very exciting for 2 things. As the previous speaker, Tara, said, coal is Indonesia is one, the just transition examples so far have mainly been in the developed world, in coal mining regions. Indonesia is a developing country. Number 2, 11% of national exports comprise coal. So it's a massive income for the country. And 3, we're going into active coal mining regions. And so Climate Action Net. So this project, we just did a scoping study. So we couldn't go to the ground because of COVID. We interviewed all the major stakeholders, right from government to communities and private sector, the coal mine owners, everyone. And now the project kicks off in early 2022. And one of the elements which is key to this, normally when we talk about just transition, or when a just transition is mentioned, they talk about the social dialogue, the tripartite, which is the employer, the worker, and the government. One core element of this project is going to be the people. Putting people, as you had said in your opening remarks, at the center of the just transition, the communities, the stakeholders, because when you look at communities affected by, communities in a coal mining region, the workers and the employees actually are a small proportion of that. The wider community, that's where the numbers are. So it's identifying, identifying the communities, including the most vulnerable, the informal workers, the voiceless, the indigenous people, the disadvantaged, and making sure they have a space on the table. So we'll be doing stakeholder involvement, mapping stakeholders, involving them, stakeholder engagement and community consultation, and thereby creating, with their inputs, creating a vision for the future, an alternative vision of alternative livelihoods for the future, which is green, which is sustainable, with justice at the center of it. And we also expect that at the end of the project, frameworks, institutional frameworks will be created whereby there is a mechanism where the local authority or the regional authority, there's a standing committee whereby where the whole entire community is represented, all the different stakeholders from the workers to the communities. There'll be a standing committee which will be meeting regularly to discuss how the process of just transition, how that is going to take place over, over the future. So this is a wonderful, exciting opportunity to really get down on the ground and create real-life examples as to how just transition can really be implemented in a manner which is fair and just.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nithi. And finally, over to Jan. Jan on the screen. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's great to be in a room with so much interesting and great people working on just transition. It's always a pleasure to have so many knowledge gathered together. So I work for the German Trade Union Confederation, the DGB, that's the umbrella organization of trade unions in Germany. We have 8 affiliate trade unions and organizing around 6 million workers in Germany from more or less all sectors. The DGB is also a member of the European Trade Union Confederation and the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. And we work on a national level on just transition, but also on a European and, of course, on an international level as well. And therefore, the climate conference is also for us an important issue. I just came back Wednesday from the COP, where I met with my international colleagues from all over the world. The ITUC, I think there are around 90 colleagues there. And what we do in Glasgow, what we did in Glasgow is we share our good examples, strengthen our discussion, and do some knowledge sharing. One success of our trade union demands was anchoring the just transition principle in the preamble of the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. And the other thing I have to mention regarding the international debate is the Sleazer Declaration of Just Transition. I think there are 2 very main points where transition is reflected in the international debate. I was asked to give a short overview about just transition processes in Germany. There I want to focus on the German coal consensus. So Hanna Brauers was talking about the hard coal mining phase out in Germany, and I want to focus on a more newer topic, the phase out of lignite mining in Germany. And I think this process is also reflecting in a good example of how transition can be organized. And maybe one thing to add, comparing the hard coal phase out in the 90s to the coal phase out. What we are facing right now is that the hard coal phase out was driven by economic pressure. It wasn't not affordable to use hard coal mining anymore in Germany. It was heavily subsidized. And what we see in transition processes now, it's not driven by market instrument, it's driven by society pressure, by political framework, and we have less time to act. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that the transition, what we're facing right now is putting more pressure on all relevant actors. So just said that, let me share a bit insights from the German coal consensus, where the trade unions in Germany were also involved in. First, I have to mention that our approach of German trade union, but also our colleagues, is that we want to bring climate action together with sustainable wealth and decent work. I think the three elements are important to understand our idea of just transition. And that was also our demand to the commission we had in Germany. So the commission was established 3 years ago by the German federal government. And the mandate was not only to phase out the using of coal, but it was also to come up with an economic acceptable and social acceptable path of the desired phase out of coal-fired power generation. And it was not only the approach to a simple shutdown logic, but instead it was a broader approach to bring all relevant actors together. So we heard it, it's not about trade unions or not about environmental activists or the state. So what we did in Germany, we bring all actors together. There were 31 members chosen from all groups. So there were the affected regions were involved, the energy industry were involved, science were involved, businesses, also the federal level, and of course trade unions. And during this process, it lasted about 7 months. There were a lot of expert hearings, but also visits to the regions, to the sectors, and to the companies. And the members of the group really get an insights what's happening there. So I think one major approach and one major thing of this commission was that the people had a common understanding what's going on. So from all sides, from the social side, but also from the economic and ecological side. So they had a common base to discuss what is needed to phase out coal. And after the 7 months, there was this really long report published, 280 pages long, and all members signed this report. So it was really broad consensus and an acceptable path for all the actors. And that this consensus describes not a simple shutdown logic, but rather it contains 3 core elements. So first, it was, of course, that the climate targets will be achieved. So that was common sense, but also that the workers in the affected industries got provided securities, so an adequate social protection for them. So there were compensation of lost wages and pension deductions, and also adjustment allowance as a bridge towards the retirement. And the third main element was that there will be provided structural funds for the affected regions. So money will be invested in the affected regions to create new decent jobs at the same extent as they will be reduced. So not just jobs, but also decent and well-paid jobs. And I think that's an important point to keep in mind, that the structural aid that will be made is it's quite heavy. That will be spent 2 billion euros per year over a period of 20 years in those affected regions, so that can be renew their industries on a local level. Maybe one main outcome of this commission was it really creates trust among the members. So trust between trade unions, trust between environmental NGOs, and also trust within the region. So I think this approach was very helpful, the 7 months, not only focusing on the energy sector, but also what's coming next. So we have to talk about the transformation in the heavy industry sector, about the transformation in the mobility sector. So this process is really provide a trust, and we keep on working with the other members of the of this group. So let me finish by summarize our 4 main demands on a just transition. So the first one, that's kind of obvious because as a trade union, that for us, but not only for us, that workers are key to the transformation. So they are a trusted partner within the industrial transformation for years, for ages. So they are have the knowledge and are already experienced in bargaining processes, and they know their companies best, so they know how to transform their companies. So that's very, very key to the transformation, to keep them on board. The second aspect, we already have heard it, is that nobody is left behind, especially in the regions, in the affected regions. So what we need is long-term acceptance pathways, focusing on structural policy for the affected regions. It is needed to have a political framework. It can be on a regional level, but it can also be on a federal level, and of course also on an international level, to have a transparent pathway which all actors can follow. And the last point, I think it's very important too, is the questions of investments into the modernization of the economy and the society. It is important for Germany, but also important for all other regions in the world, that investments which have to be made, they must also be acceptable in an ecologic manner, so that we can achieve our climate target. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jan. And I'm really pleased to see that we have some questions coming in from our audience online. But first, I'd like to open it out to the floor here. If you can raise your hand, Lara will be coming around with a mic, and we'll take a couple of questions at a time. Do feel free to direct your question to a member of the panel, but or you're welcome to ask it more generally as well.
Hello, thank you so much for the really interesting discussion this morning. I was interested in which multilateral organization should be leading on just transition. Obviously, we've mentioned there's a lot of organizations, there's a lot of forums, but who should be taking the lead? Is it the International Labour Organization, for example, with its tripartite structure, or is it another organization? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think there's a gentleman in the middle there, Lara, as well.
Hi, Joseph Lewis, policy lead at the Institution of Environmental Sciences, and I'm also co-author of our Manifesto for Transformative Change. My question comes in the context of something we've just heard from Jan, which is often just transition is driven in the context of energy, and we've heard a lot about coal, but it affects a lot more than that. It affects agriculture, it affects anyone who's a consumer of transport or energy. So how do we take something that will often start as a just energy transition and make it a just transition for all of society?
Fantastic. We'll start with those two. I wonder if Nithi and Tari would like to take the first question about the multilateral organizations should be leading. Nithi, I'll go to you first, and then Tari, I'll come to you.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something I think I haven't given much thought to. And my immediate reaction would be to have it under the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, simply because just transition is already institutionalized in the Paris Agreement. It's mentioned, and the governments have committed to it. And that there is actually a discussion was going on under response measures where just transition will be developed. You know, the text on just transition will be developed within the climate negotiations as well. So my answer would be the UNFCCC.
And Tari.
Yeah, I think it's similar. I haven't really thought about it before, but reflecting of what happened in Indonesia, where actually many institutions have already had some initiative. For example, the National Planning Agency with the UN page, which is ILO, UNDP, and some UN agencies have worked on low carbon development initiative that incorporate just transition. And then there is this Ministry of Labor in collaboration with ILO that also work on some labor issues. And also the Ministry of Energy, who actually have incorporated some kind of a green job creation in the electrification and generation. So I think in Indonesia, if we talk about that and then reflect it to the international level, I would say I kind of agree that UNFCCC would be an ideal organization to lead this, because if we talk about just transition, we kind of tend to talk also about the climate change. So if the UNFCCC can work together with ILO, I think that's going to be like the best way to move the issue of just transition forward.
Brilliant, thank you. And moving on to this question about not just energy, but the rest of society. Kwabena, if I come to you for that first, and then Hanna, it'd be great to hear your thoughts. And then, conscious Jan, I haven't come to you, so if there's anything you want to add, or if anyone else wants to chip in, but Kwabena first.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think in Ghana, it is clear, Ghana, Vietnam, and China have had the longest economic growth for the last 3 decades. But we've seen that there have been massive environmental destruction and widening income inequality. Now you have 5 clear areas where we see climate change impactors. As I said, we have electricity generation and transport and storage, and agriculture, rice milling, and non-metallic mineral production. For agriculture, the share has been falling rapidly. It's what used to be 90%. Now they contribute only 42%. The key area is transport and storage. And if you focus on private cars, taxing them with the toll, the congestion tax, you're going to start shifting income away from the very rich to the poor. And in the same time, you'll be able to reduce your emissions, because transport and storage accounts for about 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in Ghana. So by focusing on that, Ghana can easily meet its obligation by 2030. So that's why I think we should focus on specific industries. Most of the industries simply are not impacted. So this is why I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanna.
To be honest, I don't know whether I understood the question correctly. So
I think the question was, so obviously many just transitions start from the perspective of energy, but in terms of ensuring a wider transition, a just transition for the whole of society. Do feel free to say, happy to direct it to another panel member there, Hanna. So don't worry if you don't want to. If you don't want, I know that Luke has something he'd like to chip in with. So
yeah, then maybe go ahead, Luke.
I'll hand over to Luke then.
I think it's a great question. It's something that we looked at in our Environmental Justice Commission. I think when we, and this I think it applies internationally just as it does in the UK, that when we ask people what a just or fair transition look like to them, obviously it doesn't just relate to, it is important though it is, those that work in carbon intensive industries. There are also questions around distributional fairness for consumers and the public. There's questions around intergenerational fairness, around international fairness, and of course, international fairness. As well. And within our work, we call for something called a fairness lock, or it could be a just transition lock, which includes those things to ensure that actually policy is designed so that you're thinking about all of these aspects of justice from the outset, rather than designing climate and nature policies and then trying to do it bolting up on at the end. You have to be thinking about all aspects from the beginning. I think just one other thing I would say is that we held a citizens' jury, as I said earlier, in Aberdeenshire, and this will apply across the world as well. And rightly, there was a lot of concern for workers in the oil and gas industry who are going to be affected by the transition, but they're comparatively very well paid. And actually, there are a lot of service jobs, hotels, workers, shop workers who rely on the oil and gas industry. And you've got to think about the wider community beyond just the workers in the individual industries, important though they are. So I think that all of those aspects of fairness, and I think increasingly we're seeing, you know, the definition of just transition, I think, being widened and incorporating those wider aspects of fairness.
As Jan inspired the question, only fair to turn to Jan now. I see you've raised your hand, Jan, if you wanted to chip in here.
Yeah, thank you. I want to answer or give an answer to both of the questions. The first one on the international framework. I think it's also a good idea to add just transition to the NDCs. So that could be, a way that members of the UNFCCC report also what they do on just transition. So you have the framework on the international level, but what is needed is also to do it on the governmental level and also on the regional level. And that's another example I want to give. What we do in Germany regarding the other sectors. So besides the energy sector, we started in a few regions in Germany, so-called transformation councils. So those transformation councils also inviting broader stakeholders and try to analyze what's going on in the regions, what's going on in the companies in the regions, and come up with develop strategies for just transition on a local level. So I think that's really very important, because there's no blueprint for just transition strategy overall. So you need to focus on a regional level. Another tool what we use as trade unions are collective bargaining agreements. So there are some of our affiliates put just transition elements at the heart of new collective bargaining agreements and try to push the companies to invest and modernize in their companies, but also help the workers to train or through training and to qualification to keep up with the transformation process and to have skilled workers afterwards. So I think that's two ideas and strategies what we use in Germany.
Thank you. I can see we've got some questions coming in online. I'll take a couple of those and then move back out to the floor. Luke and I we've not done one of these sort of hybrid events quite like this before, so we were wondering whether or not Luke would manage the online questions. But I think I've got the hang of it, so we're all good. We have a question here for Hanna. Hanna, what was the value of all the support in the coal mining areas? Is there a measure, for example, spend per person, that can be used to inform the level of investment that might be needed in other comparable countries, EU countries, if the transition is to be effectively managed? So Hanna, we'll come to that question. We've also got one from Dr. Henrietta Hughes, who represents the Climate Justice Task Force. And Henrietta says, we call for all policies to consider the additional burden of moving to net zero for these groups. She represents a group of senior leaders across the public and third sectors in the UK, focusing on just transition for groups who are disadvantaged due to factors relating to socio and economic status and race. So calling for all policies to consider the additional burden of moving to net zero for these groups, can the panel comment on how these groups will be protected and any examples of private and public policy in this area? So that first question for Hanna on measuring value, and then I'll come to some other members of the panel on that second question. But first to you, Hanna.
Yeah, thank you. So only for the hard coal mining phase out in Germany, between 1950 and 2008, around 300 billion euros were spent on it. And the study has calculated that probably around that would have been around €1 million per worker, actually. But obviously this money hasn't been spent on each worker. And it seems like a staggering amount of money that wouldn't be possible to spend in other countries on the just transition. But what's important to have in mind that is that actually a lot of this money wasn't spent on workers or on creating new industries or any of those policies we've been talking about right now that might make sense in a just transition, but actually a large share of this money has been spent on protecting, in particular, the mining companies. And for example, it was spent on compensating other companies to buy German coal. Hanna said it before, it was an economic problem. Actually, international coal was much cheaper than German coal, so the German state kind of paid the price difference. So what I would say here is that the German coal phase out was probably more expensive than it's going to be in other countries, but that we can learn that the money that is being spent, the focus should be on retraining, obviously also compensating people for the job losses, but that a large share of this money should really be spent on creating something new. And Tari also said it before, the focus should be widened from just the people that are currently employed in the industry, but having this wider perspective of all the linked businesses on the service industry as well. And one more thing I want to add to this is that what has proven to be quite successful is to think about strategically what kind of new technologies, industries, businesses are going to be needed in the future in a climate neutral world, and then to focus on expanding this, not just to create new businesses there, but for example, to build up educational facilities, universities, training centers, etc., to really build the foundation that regions then can transition into these sectors that have the possibility also to continue to provide work and economic prosperity for regions.
Thank you, Hanna. In the interest of time, I think if it's okay, I'll just direct this next question to Tari, but if panelists wants to jump in their closing remarks on this, because it's a really interesting question around the burden of just transition policies on disadvantaged groups and how to protect them. Tari, if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think this is the question of the fact that social dialogue is very important here, because if I look at the example in Indonesia, most of the marginalized groups, including indigenous community, sometimes they're not being included during the policy making, the design of certain initiative. So I don't know, because this is in the UK, we have different social and economic status and also different kind of governance. But I think wherever it is, the social dialogue is needed. And maybe from that social dialogue, the specific group can have spatial demands. I would, for example, in Indonesia, sometimes there is this kind of, in the forestry sectors, there is allocation of the forest for the local community or the indigenous communities where they have the right to manage it themselves. So all the revenues that come from the management of the forest can be benefit and enjoyed by the local communities. But I think, I don't know if that can be transferred into the UK, because again, this is different social economy status. But yeah.
Fantastic. I think we have time for a final question from the room and a final question from online. If anyone in the room had a question, or we might even be able to just get away with two if they're short ones. In the white top, yeah. Oh, they're both wearing white tops.
Thanks so much. So my name is Kay White. I work at the Scottish Government in adaptation and climate resilience policy. And yeah, I was quite interested from something that Nithi said about these Southeast Asian countries being, the top 10 vulnerable to climate risk, or in the top 10. And my question is about, how can we ensure that a just transition also is a climate resilient one? Especially because if those who are being impacted disproportionately by the effects of climate change aren't also taken with us, then the transition itself can't ever be just.
Fantastic.
Thanks. I just wanted to touch on a point that Tari made about the definition of a just transition. There's been a lot of talk this week about how different governments across the world will define it and how they will approach it. I heard an interesting term the other day, social washing, And I think there is a concern that just using the word just transition and saying that different governments are doing a just transition doesn't necessarily mean they are, because we all define it quite differently. And I just wondered if there was any response from the panel as how we could create some sort of consensus to make sure that social washing isn't the new greenwashing.
Go on, let's take all the questions and we'll do a really good job of trying to answer them all really quickly.
Thank you very much. I'm James. I work at environmental consultancy on climate change mitigation plans. And my question is, are there any risks carrying lessons from Germany into the Southeast Asian countries?
Sorry, could you just repeat the end of that question? Sorry.
Yeah. Are there any risks carrying lessons from Germany into other sort of social and political, cultural contexts?
Fantastic. And then I'll just add a final question from our guests online. So Mark asks, says finance has been a huge element of the negotiations at COP26, and we're looking for greater funding for LDCs in general and increasing the share of adaptation finance in particular. Unfortunately, many countries around the world are still happier to fund mitigation. What strategies could be applied to unlock just transition finance globally with speed to avoid the multi-year struggle that we're seeing with adaptation? So a really important question on adaptation there. Nithi, if I come to you first, if you'd like to focus on the questions around adaptation, but also anything else that you wanted to take all the questions, any answer you want to go for, I think probably that would be lovely.
Yeah, sure. I think that was a very sensitive and thoughtful question. And with regard to this four-year project, there is a vision to move from where we are to where we want to get to, where we currently are to where we want to get to. And climate resilience is one of the end goals. So the just transition, as I mentioned earlier, that one of the things we are going to approach the sort of disadvantaged, marginalized groups who are voiceless and make sure that they are part of the journey to come up with the end goal, which is a more clean, green, just, sustainable, and also resilient future. But I think climate resilience also has to come in the broader government climate policies, that climate resilience is a goal that our respective governments have to aim for, independent of the work which is going on in just transition. It should be part and parcel of their work on climate change in general.
Fantastic, thank you. Would anyone online like to jump in on any of those questions? Do feel free to take your pick. If not, then I think there's a question there around a definition of just transition, and it might be a nice place to end is to ask people in their final remarks to sort of just to say very briefly what they think the key message they have for this audience is around what a just transition is, what's their top message on what is at the heart of that definition. So I'll move through our panelists. Why don't we go in reverse order? So Jan, and if I can ask everyone to keep it pithy, keep it brief. Jan, to you, what's at the heart of just transition for you, Jan?
Thank you. Maybe two thoughts on the questions before. I think that the adaptation is becoming more and more important as well. And even in Germany, so a country who's located quite well regarding weather crisis and so on. But even here we had some heat stress and so on. So it's also a topic for workers that they have some not only for workers, for the region as well, and for the people in the societies that they're protected. So I think it's a major issue also regarding the public health sector. So it's resilience. I think it's a key issue, not only on climate, but also to other crises like the corona pandemic. I've seen there are so many lessons learned out of it that we need in the whole society more resilient structure. So coming up to what's called for us for just transition, I would say to make the world not only in an ecological way more sustainable, but also tackling the question of inequalities, social cohesions. I think the just transition strategy can bring us forward to a more inclusive society if we really push for it.
Thank you so much, Jen. Nithi, to you.
Yeah, for me, just transition is an ongoing process which involves all the different stakeholders towards achieving a vision which is just, which ensures climate ambition and climate resilience. So it's our ongoing process, and with the involvement of all the stakeholders in our continuous ongoing dialogue.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nithi. Tari, to you.
In one word, I would say human, and in one sentence would be addressing the human and social aspect in the efforts to combat the climate change.
Thank you. And Hanna.
I want to instead answer the question that was being made about Germany and the risks from it. So I think one of the main things to have in mind is that the German transition was way too slow. So both the historic transition I was talking about, but also the current process Jan was talking about. So it's not in line with the Paris Agreement. It's not sustainable enough. So one of the main risks is being too afraid of change, listening too much to lobbying interests, and just, the push to keep everything as it is, to keeping the status quo. And I think future just transitions just need to be way more bold and way more focused on protecting the climate.
Thank you so much, Hanna. And Kwabena, to you.
Thank you. I think for just transition, we see it as a gradual process towards low carbon economy, which must be inclusive. And you must also emphasize the future generation. So we have to reverse the massive environmental destruction we've seen in Ghana over the last 30 years, where about 60% of the rivers have been severely polluted. So reversing the environmental destruction, inclusive growth, which means we have to shift taxes more towards the richer segments of society. And finally, we have to bring the informal sector more into the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists and all of our guests and the fantastic questions. And I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them today, but that's the end of our first part of this two-part event on putting people, communities and place at the heart of a global transition to a net zero future. And that focus on putting people at the heart of things has really come through every contribution from all of our panelists today, and has been a really uniting feature of the contributions, and hopefully something that will carry forward in the work that everybody is doing. And I'm really pleased to hear about all of these different examples. I found it such an inspiring experience coming to COP and hearing of these different things, and there's so much to learn from everybody around us. So thank you so much. And we're going to take a break now for 15 minutes, and then we'll move into our second part. So thank you very much, and a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.